Well, Lindsay, I'm so excited to actually just chat with you. I feel like I know you because I've been following you for so long.
Yeah.
And I think I shared this with you, but you were one of like the very first people I ever followed when I created my WellnStrong account. And I
Yeah.
think at the time you had like 10 or 12,000 followers. And I remember looking at you and I was like, I want to be like her. Like we had very similar backgrounds. And
That's
one thing, like, I've just always admired about you is that you're self-educated. Like, you just dove into the research, you dove into books, you learned how to heal yourself. And that's kind of been, my journey with my mom over the past few years.
yeah.
Um, so just, yeah, I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Me too. I feel like we come from a similar background because I
Yeah.
think that like a lot of my journey was spurred because of my dad's like liver conditions and stuff like that. So I
Yeah.
think it's always fun to talk to people that have, similar passion behind what they do and kind of like a similar ethos
Yeah.
for why they do what they do. So, yeah.
Exactly. And I think that's why I love this community so much is because everyone who is in it has either A, like battled with some health condition
Mhm.
themselves, or B is like helping a family member, and that's why like they're all the more passionate about it.
Yeah.
Um, so I love that. But anyway, yeah, with that, Lindsay, just to kick it off, I'd love if you could just share a bit more about your story, why you started your
Mhm.
platform. You just mentioned your dad,
Mhm.
and also how you first became interested in herbal medicine.
Yeah, I'll try to give a short synopsis because it always feels like such a long journey because it spans like 15 years.
Yeah.
But when I was really little, I was just kind of like a poster child for chronic illness and just being sick all the time. And I just had tons of different things going on to the point where I feel like a lot of people always thought that I was just faking. Like, oh, she just doesn't want to play soccer or she doesn't want to go to school or whatever it is. And eventually my mom kind of realized, these aren't just growing pains. There's something going on here. Like, it's not normal for my kid to have joint pain one day and the next day have a really high fever and the next day have a rash, like all of these just weird
Yeah.
symptoms. And so, over the course of kind of like my childhood and then into my teenage years, I was in and out of specialty doctors trying to figure out what was going on because I really had just a crazy rap sheet of symptoms. And I was diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis at one point. It was a misdiagnosis. About 10 years later, I would see another rheumatoid doctor who just basically said, like, you don't have rheumatoid. It's very obvious that you have lupus. Your numbers, all the labs point towards lupus. All of your symptoms point towards lupus. And at that point in time, I was given like the lupus diagnosis when I was like 22, I think it was. Um, and that was kind of like a pivotal point for me in my health journey. I'd spent those 10 years prior just trying everything that I could possibly try to see what would help make me feel better and help let me live at least a somewhat normal life. And when I got the lupus diagnosis, it was kind of like things finally made sense. And I could finally like put more puzzle pieces together to try to reach a point of feeling better and reach a point of healing with really targeted like supplementation, herbalism, lifestyle habits, that type of thing. Um, so that was when I was like 22 or almost 23. I was given that diagnosis. And over the year and a half after that, I really kind of just narrowed down what I was doing with my body. And that was at that point in time, I think I had been sharing online for about 2 years actually.
Wow.
Um, and up until then, I was sharing more about like recipes, gluten free stuff, sugar free stuff, because that was what I was like focused on. And at that point in time, we didn't have as many gluten-free options in the grocery stores. We didn't have like a
So
whole
true.
aisle dedicated to it. Yeah. And so I was just trying to find more people that were in the same boat or more people that were sharing similar content. And so when I kind of finally got that lupus diagnosis, I kind of shifted my content around autoimmune health because I felt like there wasn't that much in the space at all about autoimmune diseases. Like we had a few professionals, some amazing medical doctors that were sharing more about it online, but for the most part, there wasn't like a Instagram community or whatever.
Yeah.
But that started to really grow, I think, once more people like myself and like you were sharing more about kind of like chronic health issues and autoimmune health issues, more people started to say, oh, that's me. Like, that's me too. Like, I have these issues too. And so the community kind of just grew like organically that way. And since then, I've been sharing on social media. I think it's almost like 10 years now.
That's awesome.
Just about my journey, what's worked for me, what hasn't worked for me, what's working like for me now. I've been doing a lot of reflection on kind of different things I tried out and different paths I tried to take, and just sharing basically like what worked for me essentially, because I think there's so much information out there and there are so many
Yep.
great people you can get advice from. So I always just kind of try to focus on myself and the journey that like brought me to where I am now.
Yeah, I love that. That's an incredible story. And you touched on something really important that like I've been doing a lot of reflecting on too. And that is one size does not fit all. And
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, like you and I know better than most people because we're in the space, but like
Yeah.
it's so overwhelming when you go on Instagram and you see so much content about, you know, I cured my PCOS doing X, Y,
Mm-hmm.
and Z, or I cured my
Yeah.
cancer doing X, Y, Z. And like, this is something I continually struggle with, even with my mom, but like, it's like, what do you do? You know,
Mhm.
there's so many different paths to take. And I
Yeah.
think it's really easy to look at one person and say, oh, they healed. I'm going to do this without
Yeah.
recognizing like that might not be the best path for you, you know? So it's really about like being discerning and parsing through all of that. And one
Yes.
thing I love about your account that you're a big advocate for is just that. And
Mhm.
you're great with like balance. And I love that you call things out. You're like, you call the wellness influencers out. You're like,
Yeah.
listen, like, just because this person has a 5 hour morning routine, like, this is not realistic, right? And
Yeah.
you bring like the reality aspect back to like living well. And I
Yeah.
love how it's like, you don't have to be perfect, right? Like, you can still go get highlights at your hair salon and
Yeah.
get your nails done and, you know, and still live a healthy lifestyle. It's not all or nothing. And
Yeah.
I think there's so much like all or nothing now
Hmm.
mindset in this space.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of the reason I started talking about more of how my mindset shifted, which is something like I probably wouldn't have shared unless I started seeing like so much content around like perfection and around
Yeah.
obsession, and also just like really demeaning content. There's a lot of information in the wellness space, I think, that like maybe it's well intentioned, but a lot of it's very demeaning and kind of like, well, if
Yeah.
you can't do this, like that's your fault. Or like, even when people approach it talking about food and they're like, well, if you eat this way, it's actually really cheap. So why aren't you eating this way? Like, I don't know. I just think
Yeah.
there's a lack of empathy in a space that needs the most empathy. And that's what I've been trying to kind of emphasize too, is like along my journey of healing and really working on my health, like what I realized was, sure, I can be super dogmatic about things, but like that's just going to make my life significantly smaller instead of making it bigger. Like I'm not healing and going through this crazy like 10-year journey of effort, money, like time to get to a place where like I can't go out to dinner with people and just get
Right.
like a pizza or whatever, I want to get. So I think like for me that has been a learning process, and I think for a lot of people too, a lot of times when you go to the extreme, you're gonna eventually bounce back. It's like kind of like I always say it's like a pendulum. Like when you go so far to the right, like you can't, there's a point where you can't go any further, and a lot of
Yeah.
people eventually reach that naturally. And I think that's what happened to me, and what I've seen happen to a lot of fellow creators and people like that. So it's just like trying to emphasize, I always try to emphasize to people like, we're trying to improve your life. We're trying to make it bigger. We're trying to get you from a place of not feeling good to feeling good. But if that's going to impact, like if you're going to feel good physically, but mentally you feel drained and terrible, like what's the point?
Yeah.
um,
Exactly.
yeah. So I just try to emphasize that, especially as someone who, I was even just talking to my husband about this yesterday because I had a stomach ache for
Oh
like the
no.
first time in so long. And I was like, how did I used to feel like this every single day?
Yeah.
And just pretty much like over that span of time, seeing my own relationship with food, with supplements, with herbs, with everything, watching it change and come to a point of where I feel like I've reached really good balance, and where I've reached, like, I think I can say, like, as someone who like was diagnosed with so many autoimmune diseases, to the point where now I'm just like a healthy human being and I don't really make much of a consideration for the autoimmune side. Like, it's possible, and you don't have to do it in such a crazy rigid like way. Like, I live such a balanced life now, and it hasn't negatively impacted my health at all. If anything, I think it's probably positively impacted my health.
Yeah. Amen to all of that. I couldn't
Yeah.
agree more. And I think too, like last point on this, the stress about whatever it is you're worried about, like
Mm-hmm.
eating that seed oil at the restaurant or like
Yeah.
having non-organic coffee, like that is worse than the actual thing itself.
Yeah.
And again, like a lot of this happens to people like creators in the wellness space. Like I caught myself doing this last year where I would actually be like scared to go out to eat to a restaurant, which was absolute insanity because I was like, do they cook with olive oil? Do they cook
Yeah.
with canola oil? And then you're just sitting there at dinner, like thinking, what am I eating? And again,
Mm-hmm.
like I think education is important, but there's something to be said about ignorance is bliss, right?
Yeah.
And just kind of like
Yeah.
recognizing that, like, I don't do this every night. I'm just going to enjoy myself. Like, the
Mm-hmm.
benefits of the social component of that dinner, being around friends, that
Mm-hmm.
has so many health benefits, right? That
Yeah.
outweigh like whatever potential canola oil you might be eating.
Yeah, for
So, yeah, that mindset's super important. And another thing too, I love that you mentioned, or that you mentioned in your content rather, is I mean, there's certainly a place and time for conventional medicine,
sure.
right? And I think we both agree that for acute conditions, we definitely want conventional medicine. If you
Yeah.
fall, you need stitches, great. But for more chronic conditions, it can often do more harm than good. And
Mm-hmm.
I know you struggled with polycystic ovary syndrome for a bit. I too was diagnosed with that. I want to say when I was like, I don't know, Lindsay, like 16 or 17. And I didn't know any better. I went on birth control for 4 years, went through all of those symptoms.
Yeah.
Again, like you, sat down and did my own research and was like, is this really helping me or should I maybe consider something else?
Mm-hmm.
And I got off of it. I think I was like 23. And I went to my endocrinologist a few months later and he was like, your blood work looks great. Like, what have you been doing? You don't present as a patient with PCOS anymore. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh, just some lifestyle changes, some nutrition changes. But it just goes to show you you can reverse a diagnosis, right? Like your body can heal. And I
Mm-hmm.
think sadly a lot of people accept diagnoses from their doctors and it like
Mm-hmm.
becomes their identity, right? It's
Yeah.
like this is my life now. I have to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
So, how did you like shift that mindset? And I think that was always like kind of within you, but I feel like it came
Mm-hmm.
out more obviously post lupus diagnosis. But what things did you do to like really help shift your mindset from victim to
Yeah.
I'm gonna overcome this?
Yeah. I think that for me, like you said, it was always inside of me. Like when I was in high school and when I was diagnosed with PCOS or with the rheumatoid or with I had like a specific type of stomach disease, like I never said that I had those. Like it was actually the opposite. Like I've never like I think a lot of people get obsessed with identifying with diseases or just in general we love to identify with things because it makes us
Yeah.
feel, a part of something. And for me, it was kind of the opposite. Like I never like would say that I had PCOS, or I'd never say, even when I got the lupus diagnosis, like I remember my mom, like talking to my mom and my friends afterwards and them just being like, okay, like, well, what are you going to do? Like now that you have this diagnosis, like you have lupus, how do you feel? And for me, it was like, I never wanted to associate, like, I never wanted to associate with those things, especially as an adult, because I think growing up as a sick kid, like, you quickly get labeled as a sick kid. And even today, like, with like my extended family or whatever, people who I grew up with when I was younger, like, if I have a cold, it's like, oh my God, Lindsay is sick. Like,
Oh
oh my
no.
gosh, is she going into a flare? And I'm like, everyone calm down.
Calm down.
I have a cold. I'm okay. Um, And so because of that, I think I've talked to some people about this too. Like because of being so labeled as a sick kid when I was younger, when I grew up as an adult, like I wanted the exact opposite. I never wanted to be labeled that way, be treated that way. Like I got to a point where I like wasn't telling people, like when I went to college, I didn't tell anyone that I had any autoimmune issues. And that ultimately kind of like backfired because like there is a happy medium to it, because at the end of the day, like you do have the disease, like it's not avoidable. Just because you don't say it, like nothing's going to change. But I do think there is a mindset around it. And for me, like when I got the lupus diagnosis is when things really shifted. I feel like it was like I didn't like, yes, I had lupus, but I wasn't lupus. Like that was,
Exactly.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it wasn't my identity, and I didn't want it to be my identity. Like I wanted to just be Lindsay.
Yeah.
And I think that was part of the reason too with my healing journey. I feel like I didn't talk about it a ton like at the time, because I just didn't even want people to know that I had that or that I was struggling with that, just because of the PTSD from being a kid. But I
Yeah.
think that it is important, there's a happy medium to it. And it is important though to really disassociate yourself from your conditions, because I think mentally, like I read a book by Dr. Caroline Leaf, who I think you're familiar with. Yeah. And it's all about like rewiring your brain and how like your thoughts, every single thought you have is basically changing the way your brain works, the way your brain thinks. And
Yeah.
even saying something like, oh, like I don't know, like I'm always sick because I have lupus. Like even that mindset is going to set how like your reality basically takes place. And so for me
Yeah.
it was shifting from that to I have lupus, but I'm healing and I'm working on this, and it's not like my identity. And I think that really helped me go from, that place of always being labeled as a sick kid and then ultimately doing it to myself, like putting that label on myself and changing it to, well, no, I'm not a sick person. I'm just a healing person, which
Yeah.
I think can sound kind of cliche, but it really helped change my mindset. It helped me, go from also saying negative things like, my body hates me, my body's trying to take me out. Like, because when you have an autoimmune disease, and especially something like lupus, like you have auto antibodies that are working against your body.
Yeah.
But even that mindset, like switching that and changing that, I feel like was really significant for me. And I always try to share that with other people too, who are in like the trenches with their autoimmune disease or their PCOS or
Yeah.
whatever they're working on, is like just focus on the mindset. Like it might feel slightly delusional at first, but how you think ultimately becomes your reality. And I think if more people were told that in the doctor's office, instead of being told like, oh, yeah, this is it, you have lupus, like this is your life, like I
Hmm.
think we would see at least a better, level
Yeah.
of living for a lot of autoimmune patients.
This conversation's so timely because I literally was just talking about this like last night with one of
Yeah,
my best friends on the phone. And first of all, I love Dr. Caroline Leaf. Like she's one of my favorite people in
she's
like the
amazing.
neuroplasticity space.
Yeah.
Um, but one thing I really love too about her is like she has the biblical or like
Mhm.
provides the biblical application to like actually how to change
Yeah.
and rewire your thoughts.
Mhm.
And I know you're a Christian too, Lindsay, and like my faith has been my foundation in
Mhm.
everything I've done over the past few years. And I
Yeah.
always keep looking to the Bible, and it's like life and death is in the power of the tongue. So
Mhm.
everything you just said, right? Like the words we
Yeah.
speak over ourselves, our cells respond to our thoughts. And I think the really cool thing is that the more we learn about the mind, the more we look back to the Bible and it's like, well, the Bible already said all of this, right? Like
Mhm.
it's not new information. It's just,
No. Yeah.
it's actually really ancient wisdom. And I think that's another thing I love about, everything that you're promoting is herbal remedies are ancient, right? Like
Mhm.
these are things that have been used for thousands and thousands of years. And
Yeah.
I think it's so funny because when people like that are not familiar with the space hear herbs or hear like homeopathy, they're like, oh, like what is that? Like, is that some
Mhm.
new type of treatment? And it's like, no, actually, this has been
Mhm.
here far longer than any type of pharma pill has been.
Yeah.
So with that too, I mean, let's say someone is new to the world of herbal medicine, they don't know anything, right? But they
Mhm.
want to start using herbs to maybe help address like autoimmune disorders or hormonal imbalances. Where do
Mhm.
they start, Lindsay? Like, where did you start?
Um, I would say I always tell people to start in the grocery store because I think that herbalism can come across as something that's so complicated, like you said, like a new thing, like more of like woo woo medicine. Like it's
Yes.
like, yeah, new age stuff. And it's like not at all. It's been around since the beginning of time. And it's actually to me something that is not complicated once you actually start to learn about it, and something that really is innate to the human experience. I think that I always recommend, or I always say to people, well, what did you make for dinner last night? Like, what herbs did you include? Because I know last night for my dinner, there was oregano, there was rosemary, there was basil, there was ginger, there was
Ooh.
cumin. Like,
I
that's
saw that
all
this morning
herbalism.
on your story. I was like, that looked so good.
It was a good dinner.
Good.
But I think that if you start there, if you start by just examining and thinking about what you're, just using in your day-to-day life, you can start to see that you're already using herbs and you're already experimenting with herbs. You might not be doing it for medicinal purposes, but at least you're already using them.
Yeah.
And so I always say, like, the grocery store has a lot of accessible, easy to access herbs. Even if you live more in, like a food desert area, a lot of times you're still going to be able to find things like rosemary, or things like garlic, or things like raw honey. And you can start very small and minute with herbalism. You can start by, just making a tea with honey and lemon, and maybe you add in some rosemary or you add in some peppermint. And I think that once you start to just understand what you're already doing on a daily basis, you can easily build from that. And I always recommend starting with the easier kitchen herbs because
Yeah.
it is easy to get wrapped up in more of the herbs that like you'll find online. Like if you're shopping online, the herbs like burdock root or dandelion root or marshmallow root, any of these amazing herbs, but ones that like you're not going to find in the grocery store, you're likely
Right.
not going to find in your backyard. Um, and you start with like the easier ones and go from there. And I think there are a lot of great books on herbalism too that you can start with when you're progressing and when you're moving from, just Googling things and maybe even reading online ebooks to going from kitchen herbalism to more of the medicinal herbalism.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what happened to me. Like, I was exposed to herbalism at a young age because my dad was dealing with some liver health complications. And I would come downstairs at night and he would have like these pots of teas and they would smell so bad. And I was always like, Dad, what are you doing? um, and it's funny because then, like, 10 years later, it was the
Here you
opposite.
are.
Yeah. The only difference is like he didn't care about the taste. He just wanted, the benefits. Whereas I was
Yeah.
like, I cannot stomach just drinking chaga tea because it's
Yes.
horrible. And so when I kind of like became, late teenager, but especially around that lupus diagnosis, that's when I started really zeroing in on herbalism. And prior to that, I had been focused on a lot of lifestyle changes like supplementation, even doing functional testing and using targeted supplementation. But for me, I feel like my body really like hit a turning point when I started really studying herbalism and incorporating herbs on a daily basis. And I think that I feel that way about a lot of people. And I know that like a lot of the feedback I get and a lot of the stories that I get from others that have seen my content or seen Simbi and have gone on their own kind of like herbalism journey from there, they also see a huge turning point when it comes to incorporating herbs. So I always try to emphasize like you should have a holistic approach to healing, and a foundational approach with things like lifestyle habits and supplements. But ultimately, I do think herbs provide such a soothing but powerful healing experience for so many people on top of kind of like that firm foundation.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like too, even just the ritual of drinking an herbal tea,
Mm-hmm.
again,
Yeah.
like to the point about thoughts, like if you're drinking something that you think is going to balance your
Mm-hmm.
hormones, It
Yeah.
most likely will, right? Not
Yeah.
to say it's placebo, because like there are studies done that like there are certain remedies that do like reduce testosterone, like spearmint, for
Mhm.
example. But again, to the holistic benefit where it's like body, mind.
Yeah.
I love that. And go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, one thing we're working on like a rebrand for Simbi right now. And one thing I wanted to incorporate into the packaging was some type of like affirmation play where it's like something like when you're drinking your tea, just remind yourself of A, B, C, D. Like your body's healing, this tea is good for you. You're like honoring your body by drinking this, stuff like that, because like you said, um, placebo does play a role in all things. Like we can see that in herbal medicine studies, but we can also see that in studies with pharmaceutical drugs on how your mind highly influences actually how your body responds to things. So that was one thing I was thinking about. I was talking to my sister. I was like,
I
we
love
should try
that.
to incorporate that because I don't like our teas are not placebo. Like they work. The herbs that we use are so powerful, but like why not enhance the experience even more and make it more of a mind and body experience at the same
Yeah.
time?
I love that. No, you hit the nail on the head. And I love that you highlighted Simbi because I currently have 5 packages thanks to you that are all are open. I love them. I love the taste. I've been meaning to tell you they're absolutely incredible. And I know this has been like a dream of yours for quite some time. So it's been
Yeah.
really fun just to kind of sit back and just watch you grow. And the packaging is beautiful. But
Thank
I
you.
am curious, like when you first started,
Mm-hmm.
did you just combine your own mixes? Like did you have a specific like did you start with just one mix and was it just you and your sister like in the back room like
Mm-hmm.
putting stuff together? Like what was the process like for that?
Yeah, so I started Simbi in 2021, and at that point, I had been using herbalism for probably like 5 years, and I had a set of blends that I had already been using and that I had already been, giving away to friends, giving away to my neighbors that I like live beside in DC,
Okay.
and stuff like that. So Simbi actually like wasn't a planned thing at all. At the time, I ran a marketing studio, and I basically worked with health and wellness brands. And at the same time, I was posting on social media and gaining a small following. And when I started, my sister had been trying to get me on TikTok for like a year, and I was like, I'm not doing it. Like, I'm not going on this app with like dancing teenagers. Like, this is not for me. And she's like, no, come on. You have to think about it from a business standpoint. Like,
She was
just,
right.
yeah. And so finally I was like, okay, fine. I watched a few TikToks and was like, okay, I think I can come up with some stuff. And I started posting about herbalism specifically. And that was also my sister too, saying like, you've spent years sharing recipes, but the biggest part of your life and the biggest part of your healing journey is herbalism. Like, why aren't you sharing more about that? And so I started sharing about that, and I kind of instantly went viral on TikTok. I gained like 400,000 followers in a few months, which was
Crazy.
insane. And um, one of the first things I shared was a recipe for a liver supporting tea. And I talked about kind of my story with my dad and how like he's the one who had introduced me to herbs because of his liver health, and I ultimately made this blend for myself because of the relationship between liver and
Yeah.
endocrine issues, and then the liver and lupus. And I had thousands of emails, thousands of DMs,
Wow.
and like I had like 10,000 comments on the post being like, can you make this? Can you just make this? Even though I had posted the recipe for everyone to make. And so at that point in time, I was like, okay, like people want this. Let's just give it a shot. And so I lived in a studio apartment in DC at the time. And I placed my first herb order just from like a small wholesale shop and put together like 100 bags of tea of like a few different blends and put together a really, simple website, and I launched it, and we sold out of the blends that I had like within like an hour. So then I was like, okay,
Wow.
I'm just going to put up more on the site, put up like 500. Those sold out the same day. I didn't have 500 bags of tea or anything like that. Like, so I recruited like some of my friends, my husband, my sister to help kind of like get going. And at that point, we like I was so surprised at how well it did that I actually ended up moving home to Massachusetts for the summer because my studio apartment was a studio apartment. Like I can't be making tea in there.
Yeah.
And I enlisted my mom, my dad, my sister, my boyfriend at the time, and now husband to just basically spend the
Love that.
summer packing tea and mailing tea. And it was at that point that I was like, okay, this is like, there's a demand for this and people are loving this. So that's when I started to take it more seriously. And I was like, I have, such a vision for what Simbi can become and what we can do to help people and also how we can convert people to be their own herbalists.
Yeah.
Um, and so we just had our 3-year anniversary in May from that like soft launch point in time. And we went from 3 blends. We have 10 full-time blends now. We have a
Your
bunch of,
tinctures too, right?
yeah, we have tinctures. We just launched our first herbal capsule in May, our blood sugar balance
Awesome.
one, which is just
Yes.
a blend of herbal, a blend of herbs that can help basically balance blood sugar spikes. And then we have our second herbal capsule coming next month too. So there's a lot going on and it's been so much fun, like to run Simbi and just be able to interact with so many people and just hear so many amazing stories about people discovering herbs and,
Yeah.
how it's helped them. And yeah, I feel so lucky that I kind of like landed in this career path because it definitely wasn't what I had in mind.
Yeah, I love that. But you know what? I think the beautiful thing is that God used all of your experience up until this point. Like you said, you had a digital marketing studio. Like that
Yeah.
clearly is a really big component too of growing a
Hmm.
business. And I'm sure like your expertise there and skills there played a role.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I love that. I have definitely been learning a lot more about herbal remedies over the past few years. In fact, funny story for me, I think I kind of was like first exposed to it when I was, I don't know, maybe like 14 or 15. My dog had liver cancer.
Oh.
And I was like all about, alternative health even then.
Hmm.
So I was like trying all these different protocols on her from like the Budwig diet to like
Oh,
rubbing baking soda on her to, I mean, everything under the sun, Lindsay.
yeah.
And then I read about the benefits of milk thistle.
Mm.
And right away I was like, oh, it's like milk thistle. Like this is like a great herb for liver health. So I started giving her that. And then I kind of started tapping into other things like dandelion, burdock, and like the whole world.
Yeah.
So I think it's super, super interesting. I try to get my mom to try some, but it's hard with medications because obviously
Yeah.
like you do have to be careful with herbal remedies and
Yeah.
medication interactions. That's kind of the only drawback.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'll purchase like in bulk from like Mountain Rose. They're like
Hmm.
one of my favorite suppliers because I know
Yeah.
you do have to be careful too with like where you purchase
Hmm.
herbs
Yeah.
from. But yeah, I have like 5 bags just of like the powders though, but I
Oh
do prefer the leaves because like just like you said, you can kind of make your own
yeah.
blends.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, to the point of like suppliers, can you touch to like on what listeners should be looking for when shopping for herbs? Because as with
Hmm.
anything, right, like quality is really important and it's also such a saturated space.
Yeah. I think that the first thing you want to look for if you're buying from a business or if you're buying from like if it's a business that's selling tea blends or loose leaf herbs or if you're buying for someone like Mountain Roads Herbs, you want to look for an organic certification. There are ethical practices around, say, cut and sifted herbs that are not organic but are still something that I would use, but that takes like a decent amount of digging, talking to the business, getting information from them. I think that, like you mentioned, the herb space has become really saturated the last like year or so, I'd say.
Yeah.
Especially with the rise of TikTok shop, I'm noticing that there are so many tea companies on there. And I think that's great. Like, I'm someone who believes that all competition is good for businesses in the same area if you're coming from it from like an ethical standpoint and that
Yeah.
sort of thing because it's truly just like widening the playing field, right? It's exposing people to more of what you're trying to share. But I do think I've seen a lot on especially on TikTok of blends that are not organic and or people even saying that they're organic, but then you go on the website and there's nothing about an organic certification. You email them, they don't have anything. So I just think that's important. You don't want to be putting herbs that have been treated with pesticides inside your body. I think that it can almost do more of a disservice. And especially when there are so many great places like Mountain Rose Herbs, Frontier Co-op, Star
Mhm.
Wars Botanicals,
Yeah.
Herb Co. Like there's a lot of good options that of places that carry high quality herbs that are safe. And there are also a lot of good tea companies as well that carry organic blends. So I think for me, I would just suggest focusing on that, focus on the organic aspect. I think too, if you want to take it a step further and learn more about like a company's ethos around like the farmers they partner with, like that's another great thing to look at. A lot of times places will highlight that if they have, you know, something in that field that's important to their business, like that will be on their website too. So
Yeah.
just really understanding where the herbs are coming from is the most important piece, I'd say, when trying to decide like where to buy from.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I am curious too, Lindsay, do you like either currently or like in the future, like are you going to like get a manufacturer to like help put the blends together? Or is this something like you and your family are just like continuing to do? Because I'm sure you're getting like so many orders. Like, how do you
Yeah.
handle?
Yeah, so we have a warehouse in the town that I live in, Virginia, and we I got really lucky with being in this area because my sister had gone to college here, and so I just essentially employed like all of her friends
That's
like
amazing.
to blend. Yeah, and it was great because I didn't really have to worry about like warehouse management either. Like my sister from the get-go was in charge of the employees managing their schedules and just like figuring out how to get done what we needed done. And so we have explored, like I have talked to a few manufacturers, especially last year as demand like really increased. I talked to a few manufacturers about it, but ultimately we decided we wanted to keep it in-house. I like knowing where the herbs are coming from. I like knowing which
Yeah.
farmers we're working with. And
Yep.
a decision we kind of made this earlier this spring was focusing on that more. And as like we grow as a company and as we, you know, move into bigger spaces, like obviously the financial side of things is very important. It's important to grow and have that profit there, but also at the same time, a lot of what we do is around, I feel like, is focused on the relationships that we form with people, whether that's our customers or the farmers we're working with, and trying to really just deepen that relationship and make that like a focus and something that is important to us. So like I know we're excited because next year like we have a lot of trips planned to visit like different farms and stuff like that and
So
really get to
fun.
know. Yeah. And it's like we could easily outsource it, but
Yeah.
I really enjoy that side of things. I like getting to know the people we're working with and having, you know, such a mutually beneficial relationship there. And it's also just fun. We like Simbi is such, I mean, I speak for myself, but I think just from like our conversations with our employees and stuff, it's just a fun place to work. It's all girls. We we're all like slightly introverted, so I feel like it works well because there's like time for chit chat, but then like there's time to work and
Perfect combination.
yeah, and like I work with my sister manages all the warehouse stuff. So it's just been so much fun that we don't really want to outsource it either. Like we like
Yeah.
having that in house. We like controlling, being able to control everything to do with the teas. Whereas with the tinctures and the capsules, we have an amazing manufacturer partner, and
Yeah.
they have really helped us like be able to grow to a point. If we were doing that in house, we would do it at a much slower rate. So
Of
that's
course.
where that's been really beneficial, is having that manufacturer relationship.
Yeah, that's so smart. A few thoughts that came to mind. You remind me a little bit of Andrew Salisbury, who's the founder of Purity Coffee, in the
Oh
sense that like you enjoy like that interaction with your suppliers. Like he also has like so many trips planned to like go visit
Yeah.
all these coffee farms in like Colombia. I was like, can I come with you? But
Yeah.
that's his most fun. Like he enjoys that, you know, like the
Mhm.
most. And I understand why, because it really is about relationships. And I think the beauty is like customers see that like if that's something you really value, right? Like they appreciate the
Mhm.
brand all the more because they know that they're also supporting like, you know, those people and, you know, wherever
Yeah.
supplier you end up, you know, choosing. So I love that. And then I also love that your sister has played such a big role in
Yeah.
Simbi, because my sister, I forget, did I tell you about my sister? I feel like I have at some point. She lived in DC. She lives in DC.
Oh, yeah.
You guys went to the same church, I think, because we were
Yes,
talking about Ben
Fashion City,
Stewart.
right?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
So I don't know if she still goes there. She's like, they're moving, she and her husband are moving to a townhome in the next few
Okay,
months. But yeah,
nice.
she's in DC, but she's so funny because she's a lawyer, but like she doesn't like her job. And she
Uh,
basically is like, she's like, Jacqueline, she's like, we need to create something.
yeah,
Like, what do you want to create? And I was like, well, I was like, this girl Lindsay like created a business with her sister, and she's
yeah,
like, let's do that. Like, what are you creating? So like honestly, like we've been kind of like brainstorming something
yeah.
too, because I feel like to your point, it's so fun when you can create something that is
Mhm.
high quality and benefits so many people, right?
Yeah,
So we're kind of like in ideation
that's
phase right now, but
exciting.
it's inspiring to just like see what you guys are doing because it's just
Yeah.
encouraging that it can be done, you know?
Yeah, and I think too, like, it's so funny. My original like career path was also to go the lawyer route, and like that's why I moved to DC and all of that jazz. But ultimately, like my health would not allow me to go back to school. Which now, like as you mentioned earlier, like everything works out for a reason. But I think that like working with my sister and having a job that I genuinely just like love has also improved my health so much. So I'm
I'm
always telling
sure.
people too, like that's a huge piece of it. Like I feel like I'm very lucky to have a job that I love. And I think that if more people really did enjoy what they liked, like their life would also be more enjoyable, which is,
Yeah.
really important for health.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more.
That's exciting. We should talk outside of this
I
too.
know. Can we? I would
Yeah.
love that. Because I'm telling you, I'm just like learning from you all the time. Oh, so you also have this incredible guide that I will be linking on like all things herbs. And one thing you spoke about is like the different herbal actions of herbs, like
Mhm.
how some are adaptogenic or
Mhm.
antimicrobial or antioxidant. Can you touch a bit more on like how that plays a role in your determining which herbs you combine in a certain blend?
Mhm. Yeah. So when we're looking a lot, as I mentioned before, a few of our blends that we released originally were blends that I was using for years. But now when we're creating new blends, maybe ones that like weren't so much for me because the original ones were all ones that I used, like say leaky gut tea or kidney support tea. Like those were two blends that I had previously not really used myself. Like I had a lymphatic blend that's kind of similar to kidney, but the kidney I really wanted to tailor specifically like to that organ. And so when I'm creating a blend, I am approaching it from the standpoint of okay, we need obviously for a kidney blend we need diuretic herbs, so herbs that help the kidneys move along at more efficiently and at a better pace, but also at the same time we need supporting herbs that are soothing. And I think that with all of my blends and everything that I make, that's kind of like the main focus is I want it to be powerful, but I don't want it to be too powerful. I want it to be powerful, but I also want it to be soothing. So usually I try to pair herbs accordingly. So like you mentioned, like I always focus on antioxidant rich herbs just because those are great supporters of any blend we're working on. And then also anti-inflammatory herbs as well. And then herbs like say like marshmallow root. I include that in a lot of our blends because it's such a soothing herb.
Yeah.
And it's so great, like when you have it alongside liver support, but it's also so great when you have it alongside like a gut support blend. So I just try to really zero in on herbs that, are going to work for what I want them to work for. So for like our liver support, for example, we have burdock root, which is an amazing detoxifying supporting herb. And then we also have dandelion root, another powerful herb. And those are two that are kind of like the main focus. But then we also have, marshmallow root and red clover in there and ginger root, that really provide that extra step of
Yeah.
soothing the liver versus just like really going heavy on the detoxifying processes, because I don't want people getting sick. I don't want people having really like detoxifying reactions. Like that's not what I'm looking for. I think
Yeah.
that there's a lot of blends, tea blends out there that are like that. So if that's what you're looking for, you can, there are places to find them. But for me, like I want something that's still going to be really supportive for your body and not super aggressive. I think there's a
Yeah.
time and place for aggressive herbs for sure. But in the context of Simbi, where we are just introducing people to herbalism, I do not want
Yeah.
that happening. So that's kind of how I go about it.
Yeah. No, that makes complete sense. Are there any herbs, Lindsay, that contradict each other that should not be used together in a blend? Or like, would you say they all work synergistically?
It depends. Like there are herbs like that can possibly contradict each other.
Like,
It
can
depends
one
on,
overpower another? Like, I don't know if that's like herbal wars. Like, if you put
yeah.
two herbs together, like, what is gonna win out?
It depends again, like on the dosage of herbs as well
Yeah.
as like when comparing like the type of herb. I think that if you're approaching, also a lot of what I kind of incorporate with our blends is an Ayurvedic approach, and they have a huge, that like field of medicine has a huge emphasis on hot and cold herbs. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit different, but that's more something that like I would focus on versus like how the herbs interact. So it's like I'm not going to put ginger in a blend with peppermint because those two, well, depending on what the blend is for, it depends. But like if say like daily hydration, which is a summer
I
blend
love that
that's supposed
blend.
to cool you down. Thanks. I have it steeping right here right now, but you have hibiscus in that blend, and that's kind of a cooling herb that's great for summer. I'm not going to add a warming herb to that blend because in that instance, those two will cancel each other out. So
Yeah.
I'm really careful with that side of things, and then also careful with pairing herbs. So we don't want, like for the liver support tea, like we're not going to throw in every single herb that's a detoxifier. Like we're going to throw in some and
Yeah.
then provide like the supporting herbs so there isn't too much of a reaction there.
Yeah. You just made me think of something too. I feel like I wanted to ask you this a long time ago and I just forgot. But what are your thoughts on SCAC tea? Have you heard of that? Because again, like in the cancer space, like there's all these
Mm-hmm.
different treatments and alternative therapies people are
Yeah.
using, one of which is SCAC tea, which contains like a high amount of like burdock root and like sheep sorrel. And like
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of anecdotal stories about how it's helped a
Yeah.
lot of people. I was just curious what your thoughts were on that, if you heard anything.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to cancer in particular, it's kind of like it's a touchy subject, obviously, because it's a very serious condition. And the way that it's treated in Western medicine is like when you get your diagnosis, it's like doesn't matter if you're stage 1, stage 4, or if it's what type it is, the immediate reaction is like, we need to start now. Like
Yeah.
we have to do chemo, radiation right now. And there's like a huge, intense kind of pressure to just step forward real quick with like different treatments. And so I think that it's kind of similar in the herbal space too. Like I've seen so many products that kind of say that like they help with cancer. I know like, oh, there's a huge following of like Dr. Sebi, who was someone who worked on cancer research from an herbalism standpoint. And I think that a lot of it comes back to being anecdotal, like you mentioned. And while we don't have research around like the tea you mentioned specifically, we do have research around the ingredients within it.
Yeah.
Like burdock root, we have a lot of good research around. So it's worth like, to me, I I would never like, I can't like tell people like what to take or not, what not to take, but I think it
Yeah.
is worth like exploring those options, especially if it is something that isn't going to have a bad
Right.
interaction with medicines people are already on. But that's a tough point with cancer too, is like typically you are put on medication rather quickly, so it's like you have such a short window, I feel like, to experiment with
Yeah.
other options, so it's kind of a hard approach.
Yeah. No, couldn't agree more with you there. And that's been my experience, like with my mom over the
Yeah.
past almost 6 years now. But yeah, it's that very quick, okay, let's get on this protocol.
Mhm.
And I think sadly, like it's really not until more advanced stages that people look to other options when it should kind of be the reverse.
It's a process for sure.
So like, yeah, but to the point, I think like all those options should definitely be explored initially. And like, if it doesn't have any interaction, like, why not? And my mom was on milk thistle for a while too. And sometimes it's just about timing, right? Like if you don't take it with a certain medication, but you still take it within 24 hours, you're fine, like, so
yeah, there is a lot.
That can be a whole other conversation we'll have to have at some point. But anyway, Lindsay, this has been so much fun. Again, I'm so glad I finally got to meet you. You're such a sweetheart, and I'm really looking forward to staying in touch. But where can listeners find you and learn more about Drink Simbi?
Yeah, so I have, there's 2 different places on social media, either at Wellness with Linz, which is my social media. It's kind of where I post the behind the scenes of Simbi and growing a business and that type of thing. And then also just things about herbs, recipes. It's kind of like a hodgepodge of random things.
And really cute pictures of your dog.
Oh, yeah. Rowie is on there a lot. Yeah. He's a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel. And
he's adorable.
Yeah, he's so cute. I am obsessed with him, which is why he's on there a lot.
I remember when you first got him, I don't have a dog currently, but I really want one. But I was like living vicariously through your stories from like when he was a baby to like as he's grown. It's so funny.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, the first 6 months, he was insane. So I always tell people like when they want to get a dog, I'm like, do it. But like just an FYI, like they're cute, but some of them can be insane. Like my dog, like he was a nutcase until he was like 8 months old, and then he started to slow down. But like he was impossible. Like we literally could not crate him. He would sit in the crate for 3 hours and cry and bark in our apartment.
Oh, no.
We lived in Florida. But then like my sister got the same breed, and her puppy was an angel. So it all depends.
It depends which one you get.
Yeah. But he's great now. He usually just like sits at my feet while I'm doing these.
Aw. And hopefully like he can get out his energy like with your yard now,
Oh,
like,
yeah. He definitely does. And just like the walks and being with my sister's dog, like is so helpful. But
I love
the breed. So I do recommend it. But and then Simbi is at Drink Simbi on social media, and you can find us on TikTok, Instagram, Pinterest. Those are like the main platforms we're on. And our website too, if you are looking for like more in-depth just topics about herbalism, we do have a blog that I try to post a new blog post at least every week, once a week,
awesome.
about usually in relation to a topic that I'm thinking about or in regards to products that are coming out, stuff like that. But that's kind of like the content heavy space. So that's
awesome.
The options.
I love it. I will be linking all of those in the show notes. And one thing I will say to listeners is that like Lindsay's content is just, you make very complex topics very simple. And I think that's why like your content's so engaging, just because your ability to teach. You're a teacher at heart, I think too.
Thank you.
And my last question for you, Lindsay, is what does being well and strong mean to you?
I think it means being healthy and being happy and just being grateful for waking up every single day and being able to do what I do, surrounded by the people that I am, and having the options that I have to make around my health. So
love that. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Lindsay, I'm super excited to share this with listeners. I look forward to having you on again at some point soon. Yeah. And yeah, I'm excited to continue to watch you and Simbi grow.
Thanks. I appreciate it. It was so much fun to talk finally.